I wanted to sort of think big. So one of the things that's happening at the moment around the world is this idea that creativity and culture is becoming a way of differentiating cities from each other. There's an argument to say that cities are almost more important than countries. That you're beginning to see, if you look at the way London is operating at the moment, it's competing internationally. But even within countries, we're working in Sydney. Sydney's competing with Melbourne. Melbourne's competing with Adelaide. They're all competing with Chinese cities. We're all competing with each other. And so the arts have moved from a philanthropic, a state-funded, good-to-have idea to an essential part of an IP-driven economy. So world cities are beginning to use placemaking, and this word, this term, which no one really owns. There is not a placemaker in the way that maybe there's an architect, but it's a term that's, I mean, in the last year, I've traveled around the world, and this term comes up over and over again. Infrastructure deliverers, property developers, city authorities, placemaking is the big word. But the problem, to some extent, is what is it? So what I was going to try and do today was string maybe 10 or 11 ideas that we think placemaking is, and then show projects that we've worked on as part of that. So the other big thing that's happening is this idea of city clubs. If you can see on the screen here, there's 34 cities that make up the World Cities Forum. They're comparing their cultural and creative ideas. So some are festival cities, some are creative industry cities. And the idea really is that beginning to understand that what differentiates and separates them, but they can also learn from each other. So you're beginning to see these clubs. Clubs is a good thing. So the gateway cities as a group, comparing their ideas, looking at each other, helping each other, but at the same time differentiating is a good thing. We worked on a project last year in Europe called CREART, that's 12 second-tier cities, and drawing out the essence of what makes them different from the other cities, and then making more of it, and getting the commercial and private sector to be part of that discussion. The other big thing here, and we're seeing it in this amazing space, is that cities are now factories for ideas. We don't make things in factories. We make ideas in factories. So IP, ideas and creativity is what's drawing the new businesses, the Googles and the Apples and so on, to cities that have a creative and cultural identity, that have knowledge workers, researchers, universities and partnerships. This is what a kind of younger, more nomadic workforce wants. It wants to go to places that are both interesting to be in, but also understand what they're interested in, which is creative areas. We just finished a project in Sydney called the Sydney Cultural Network. We joined up 27 cultural institutions in the city under one brand, so that they're now effectively working together as an ideas-driven conglomerate of creative and cultural organizations. Why are they doing that? Because the city realizes that it has a strong cultural offer, and it is not making enough of it. What that's meant for the private sector is they've got somewhere to go now. They can talk to an organization. It's not that we're going to talk to a museum. What could they possibly offer us? We're a property developer, we're a real estate investor, we're city planners. Museums, art galleries, how can that benefit us? Who can I talk to? So we've all got a job to play here, and one of the projects we've been involved in the US has been in Boston, around the Huntington Avenue area, what was once called the Avenue of the Arts. And this idea of a sort of triangular relationship between the city, particularly the planners and legislators, the commercial sector, thinking more creatively about their products, their buildings, their public realm, their street furniture, their art, their relationships with the organizations around them, and finally the cultural sector. And we have to do much more, I think, to come out of our slightly cloistered world into this brave new world. And there are pitfalls, but there's also amazing opportunities, as I'll show you. So the cultural network, this idea of grouping, clustering, connecting things together, for me is the way forward. And you're seeing it in South America, you're seeing it in Australia, in China, in Europe, and so on. And it's something that travels. You're in a great position to have that similar structure. This is the work that we've been doing, the avenue, what we're now calling the avenues to the arts, which is we've taken Huntingdon, we've topped and tailed it with Copley at one end and Longwood at the other. We've changed the map structure to look at it as a conceptual idea, and we've clustered around 38 cultural organizations, big and small, around this central area. And what we're doing at the moment through the Boston Foundation is effectively developing a sort of large group that's bringing those three triangular relationships together. In fact, this is the triangle. So again, cultural sector, city, civic, and then commercial, all working and mutually benefiting from a relationship with each other. So before I start the project, I just wanted to show this slide. This is a place called Chien in Morocco. I just think it sums up the value of a big idea. And we are in a time of big ideas. The big idea here is to paint the town blue. So you paint the town blue, paint doesn't cost a lot, and then of course tourists then come to the town, they spend money, they want to see this extraordinary city, this town, they want to stay there, they want to film and photograph it, it's used as backdrop. Suddenly this simple idea becomes extraordinary. So the value, we are in a time where money follows ideas, follows chutzpah, the kind of arrogance of saying we are the town or we are the city that does this and we do it better than anyone else. And I think that is a very American trait, to have that sense of being, leadership and in a sense taking a chance, making an advantage out of something powerful. So what I'm going to do now is quickly go through, I'll try and go quickly, it's probably not a word you'd associate with me, but cultural placemaking, an 11-point plan. The first thing is that we always work on the idea of a cultural audit. A cultural audit is physically where are we? What is around us? It's almost like creating a series of lights that show we've got poets and writers and filmmakers. We've got people interested in certain things. There's businesses, there's policies. We're scooping all of that up and trying to create a sort of picture of a place which might be physically close to the building that we're in, or it might be, in the case of a group of smaller cities, a regional idea. But the essential thing is that the audit starts to create a story and a narrative. And for me, placemaking is about narrative. It's a story and a vision that's so powerful that everyone believes in it and contributes to it. This is a cultural audit here. This is Crossrail, one of the biggest engineering projects in Europe. It's now called the Elizabeth Line, and it's the new railway system that goes under the ground across London. What we did there was we took the 8 central stations, and we did an audit to create a place character for each of the stations along the line. What that's turned into is the culture line, which is 8 galleries, 8 stations, 8 artists working, embedding their art into the architecture, infrastructure, and engineering of those stations. It's attracted substantial amounts of investment and funding from the private sector because it's a big idea, a big cultural experience. But it's clever in the sense that it piggybacks money and investment that's already in the system. This is not separate money for art, it's art embedded into the bigger funding. In Earl's Court in London, we did the same thing. We took the master plan, we created character areas through the auditing. That gave us the brief for the architects, the brief for the landscape architects, the brief for the business investors, for the idea of this as a creative district for London, driven by essentially a private sector real estate kind of approach. So suddenly seeing the budgets embedded into things which wouldn't normally have a sort of cultural value. And in Wembley, in London, the same thing again. We've turned Wembley into a new creative district for London, and it's a place of live entertainment and activity. What that now means is everyone involved in that project has to support that big idea. You should be able to do a procession, you should dance, it should be a home for creative people to go to. There'll be free Wi-Fi across the entire development, high-speed Wi-Fi, so that you can go there and work outside and use the cafes. So what you're doing effectively is taking a creative cultural vision and you're embedding it into often quite, once would have been quite dry, quite sort of academic, structural approach. And again, going back to the avenues to the arts, you can sort of see the process that we've gone through to get to this stage now where we've created this audit, and that audit has created a narrative, and the narrative will be part of that thinking. The second idea is cultural assets, and I've sort of perhaps moved into that. I'm going to show a couple of little videos here. This is the most effective thing of all, because effectively, if there is money for a road, a boulevard, trees, a park, a building, that can have cultural value. Bringing arts and creative people into that process at the beginning, it should be a given. But it's tough, because we are not good at sitting at a table alongside a kind of tough development team around real estate or city making. But that's what we, the cultural sector, have got to do. And I think it's the commercial sector particularly have got to understand the value of art and creativity for big ideas. So here's a big idea. This was a landscape project. We've taken the budget for the landscape and turned it into the P5K. It's a 5-kilometer running track. It will be elevated. You will come to London, you can run the P5K. It's the charity run that everyone can do. If you create the ultimate the Peninsula 5K running track, everyone will go down there and run it. And there'll be a commercial dividend as part of it. So we've taken the landscape budget, we've taken a big idea, and now this project is going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. If you come to London, you'll see it as you fly into London, and you'll go down there and run it. It's an international idea. So it's sort of almost a kind of high-line concept, but it started with core budgets that were already in the system. There was no money or funding for the arts. And I think we'll just show a little video. So what you're looking at is the model of the development area, which is Greenwich Peninsula. It's a new creative district, and every cent, every dollar that's spent on that site has to have a cultural dividend. So when you do it on a large scale, and you're dealing with some of the big spends and ideas that will come in any city of any scale, suddenly things that you didn't have a cultural value suddenly do. But the reason for this, of course, is to build up that narrative, because you want inward investment, you want people to stay, you want organizations to see your city as being something extraordinary. What's the narrative for that place? Okay, thanks. And this is some of the drawings of how it will look. What's happened here is that this project has become so big that the clients have now invested in it and made it much bigger. The original idea was probably to mark the ground as a 5-kilometer run with color and graphics and so on. It's now become a physical, elevated piece of engineering. The second project, as part of the same development, is an energy center. So when we started the project, the energy center, 50-meter chimney, it's green energy for the area. It's been stripped of cost to the point where it's a box with another box sticking out the top of it. What we did was persuaded the developers that this was at the front of the scheme, and that energy center should show the energy that comes through the energy center, a kinetic, sculptural idea. We put this out as an international competition. We chose 5 artists to work with the engineers on the job, and Conrad Shawcross, who won the project, created this extraordinary thing called optic cloak, this amazing. It's actually more cost efficient and beautiful than the original design. This is what happens when artists are allowed to get in early and be part of the kind of thinking process. As long as they're sitting alongside somebody who can actually build the chimney or build the bridge. I'll show you a little video, it's just a couple of minutes long. So there is an example. It has created huge amounts of interest from the press, so there's a PR value. It's used the budgets that were in the system. It's created a focal point. It's rethought something that was essentially quite an ugly, cost-efficient object. And this idea, this is the Crossrail. In Crossrail, this is the new Crossrail station in Canary Wharf. And again, I'm just going to show you a very short video, an animation of what's happened. So on Crossrail, every station is now an art project. Every piece of spending is invested in this idea of a creative and cultural idea. The reason for that is not art for art's sake, but it's because London, for all its size, has to constantly reinvent itself as a creative destination, as does every city now. So whereas once art, culture was a separate thing, now it's embedded into the thinking. And we'll see one project after this which sums up that kind of idea. Money is following creativity and culture. Apple has just moved in London, not to the usual sites, but to a brownfield site on the edge of the city. Very different expectations now about what cities are for. So this is Mikhail Rovna, and the piece that you're seeing relates to the numbers of people coming through the station. The numbers are picked up and they release a series of films on digital screens. Okay, thanks. And then the last one of this set, this is the Illuminated River project in London. This again has come through a foundation and private funding. And the project that came out last year was to light all 16 bridges along the Thames as a kinetic or a major artwork. As you fly into London, the whole of the river will be lit up. We won the project. using an American artist, Leo Villarreal, who did the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. And again, I'm just going to show you a very, very short film. I think what's exciting for me on this is this is one of about 15, 20 major projects that we have running through our office worldwide, and we are just a drop in the ocean to what is happening around us. So the appetite, it seems to me, for the private sector, for the city makers, for planners, for politicians, is to understand that creativity and culture now does have a benefit both economically as well as much as it is about community. So thinking as imaginatively as you can about the assets that you have around you is I think, is core. So these bridges will, the competition went out as an architectural competition. All of the other shortlisted entries were architects with lighting engineers. Our solution was an artist supported by engineers and architects. So it was an artist-driven concept. Each of the individual bridges will be lit and will react to temperature and movement. All 16 bridges will be interconnected, so there's a sort of relationship between the 16, rippling backwards and forwards across the river. But I think what we're beginning to see now, certainly in the big Asian cities, is the idea that architecture can be art. The facades of buildings, the lighting systems, now parks. Increasingly, the idea that creative organizations can work in parallel, in partnership with these providers is really exciting. And we're certainly winning huge projects around the world taking this approach. Thank you. So the next one, number 3, is cultural principles. The big problem with this kind of way of working, and I'm sure you're finding it yourselves, is trying to join up things that aren't necessarily joined up. So the way that we've done it really is to come up with a set of core principles that everyone agrees. So we'll do a certain amount of meetings and interviews, research and auditing, and at the end of it you might end up with, say, 7 or 8 core ideas that represent a place and that everyone can feel this is something that they can add into. So in the case of the Avenues to the Arts project, we've come up with a series of placemaking principles, and I'll just run through them. The idea really is that whether you're a developer or you're an investor or you're a community organization, you're effectively joining up under one big idea, and then underneath that some key deliverables. So for Boston and for that particular area, it's an incredibly connected part of the city. So connectivity is a principle. The activated public realm, the idea that public space does more than just be a passive space. Can we create places where things can happen? Music, dance, theatre, talks, events, exhibitions. Can we use the outside of our cities in a more creative, joined up, curated way? Inside out, this is linking to the neighbourhoods and the communities around Huntington. It's starting to see the galleries and museums coming out of their institutions and out into the public spaces and working with these organizations outside of the institution. Creative Springboard, this is an interesting stat is that Boston is the 3rd youngest city in terms of demographics in the country, and the Huntington area is the youngest part of the city. So you've got this extraordinary number, around 60,000 18 to 25-year-olds who are based in this particular area. So Creative Springboard for the young makes sense as an idea. Doing things from beginning, don't wait till the end. Temporary contemporary is about pop-up, but it's pop-up with purpose. It's joined up thinking about what that's actually trying to achieve. So the idea of a temporary spaces being much more strategic about what they're trying to achieve. Active frontage, this means we're working with Boston Properties, looking at their empty spaces, ground level spaces, activating them for cultural use. And then culture as a catalyst. Finally, the sort of brand. What is the brand that sucks all this together, brings it all into one place? Number 4 is cultural partnerships. In universities, we talk about peer review. It's not enough to say that you're good, you need others to say it for you. So finding people like you, finding organizations like you that support what you're doing is effective. So with property developers that we've worked with, we've been very good at brokering and moving institutions into new developments. So the 3 you're seeing there, the English National Ballet are moving into a new home. One big development that we're working with, paid for by the developer, because they can see that having this huge cultural heart at the epicenter of their new development is going to help them in sales and PR and marketing, but it also creates a narrative for the development. 90 studios going into another big development, and a new gallery in a third. And this is just one of the schemes. This is a new residential development that we've been working on, and they've gifted ground floor commercial space, which has a commercial value, and they've given it to the Royal College of Art, which is one of the great world cultural institutions. And everybody wins on this. The space has provided a home for the RCA. It's created value from the uplift on the residential, and it's also created a home for experimental space for students to work in. It's also added to a new part of London. The new US Embassy has moved to Nine Elms in London, and this area is a brownfield industrial site, so there's huge development going on, so they need cultural investment. So this has been a hugely successful thing. Value system. So this is probably the most important principle. We've been working with Cushman & Wakefield on trying to see, the problem we have in the arts is trying to create trying to explain to a private sector what the value of doing these slightly crazy things. So planning gain is a value. It helps get planning. Asset value. It raises the value, the marketing value of a place, because suddenly people want to go there because it's interesting. Political support, because it adds to a bigger idea. Rental value, which is a big part of the London market now. PR and marketing, hugely valuable. Some of those projects, the Energy Centre has had around £30 million worth of PR investment because of that, changing it from a cost strip building to a kinetic artwork. Community development, it offers the community ideas and opportunities and access they wouldn't normally have. And local consumer spend, like the P5K, 150,000 people a year will go down there, they will run that track, they'll bring their friends, they'll buy a cup of coffee. So we've been trying to find a sort of value system. So you need to find value systems for cultural investment. Vision and identity is number 6. This is all about branding. The big idea needs to be branded. It needs to have a clear, the term you use here, the elevator pitch, if ever it was the most accurate way of describing the problem we have in the arts. We're too long-winded, and we take forever to explain what we do, and everyone's gone and left the room by that stage. So simplifying things down, making it effective, understanding the kind of audience. So this is for the Avenue of the Arts. So if you remember, we've taken Huntingdon, we've turned it up on its end, we've put Copley at one end and Longwood at the other. And so when we were thinking of the branding and the crossways, the Avenue of the Arts became that. That's the brand. So avenues to the arts as it is now, we'll have that as a brand. A very simple idea, easy to understand, given away for free. That will become an accessible idea that in Boston everyone will get copies of. And then you see how it starts to be used into the other branding structure. So never be scared of brand, graphics, design, film. Those are the things that sell the idea and the application. And this actually is one of the ideas we've had with the T, the much unloved train, or tram, it seems to me. I got very excited when I saw it, but when I saw that photograph, it was like sort of, someone said to me, it's like East Germany in 1974. We wanted to look like that, which is the art tram. And there was this great thing where effectively the T fits nicely into that idea. So that's one idea we're pushing at the moment. So the idea of an art tram running up and down Huntingdon, all the cultural organisations mapped, gateway organisations at different points, Mass Art at one end, Boston Library and Berkeley, all kind of connected, and Northeastern at the centre. So joining and coalescing groups. Creating communities is huge. I've not spent time on this one so much because most of the time when we work, we're trying to excavate the money and the opportunities really early on, and then we kind of connect into communities once we know what we've got to spend and we can work with them. But having said that, one of the best projects we've been involved in recently was a huge new development in the Midlands in the UK. When the house that they used for the marketing house or sales house was finished, we managed to allow artists to go and live in the house. And they then worked with the community to design and build some of the things which were there. The funding was for them: a creche, a library, a community centre. We got the budget, we got the advice, but the client was the community. And the artists did a series of workshops using this house as part of it. And these are people who've moved into the area and are now living in this new Great Knighton scheme. So Habitorials, which is a great website, they became the sort of voice of the community, both new and old. On that particular project, they also provided briefs and ideas for the developers as the phases moved on. This is a wonderful project. This is in Bearwood in the south of England. It was the site of shipbuilding in the 16th century, and what the landscape architects have done with artists is they're growing trees which will create the shape of a ship. So they've built a steel frame which looks like the hull of an old wooden man of war. The trees push around the steel, and when they're finished, you'll have a series of oaks that create a little copse for children to play in that's in the shape of the ship that the wood was once cut down to use for building. And you can see there how this sort of idea of forcing the trees around a particular shape. That was taking a landscape budget for a new residential greenfield site, but using artists and getting them working alongside the design team. So we're great believers in embedding the arts into this stuff right at the beginning, right from the early outset. This is another very, very quickly on project where this is High Wycombe, where the empire we once had, all the furniture was built in High Wycombe. And when Queen Victoria visited the city, they built an arch made of the furniture that was built in the town. And she went through this triumphant arch made of tables and chairs. We recreated that as a community project, and we gave, I think it was 500 people in the city had a flat pack chair, and on a given day they came in, assembled the chairs, and the chairs created the new triumphant arch. So this again was then a sculptural idea. So the community is part of the thinking, tapping into the resources and money that's there, bringing them into thinking around roads, parks, planting. Everyone is doing it. And the projects I'm showing you are just the tip of an iceberg of things that we're involved in and know are happening around us. We talked about temporary contemporary. This is a pier in the same site as the Energy Centre and the P5K. We branded it in a stunningly original idea called the Jetty. We then put in an immersive theatre group onto the jetty using containers, not particularly original idea. And that has now become the experimental place for this new development. So this is, at the moment, there's an exhibition of urban planting and farming using that site. So the site now becomes the place where things happen. So this is that thing about doing things from the beginning. If we come to this town or this city, where is the place that you go to where the experimenting, the seeding, and the ideas are being nurtured? And this idea of thought leadership and containing things under a single brand. And nearly coming to the end, Creative Districts as an artificial unit, all the projects that we're involved in are work around this idea of a creative district. And those who've seen me talk before, or heard me before, I'm a great believer in this idea of a club structure. You artificially create a shape, you create content for it, and it's easier to control all the disparate and different things that are happening. So in this case, Greenwich Peninsula this is their marketing, London's emerging cultural district. Millions and millions and millions of dollars being spent now on creativity and culture, and it's working. Film studios are moving in, museums are moving in, institutions and organizations that want to be in a creative place are moving in to the area. So it's commercially working for them. Just across the water, the English National Ballet are moving into this new scheme in City Island. Just voted new best place to live. This is Wembley Park. What's interesting for me is that these are their marketing materials, their websites selling real estate and selling placemaking, and they now understand it and get it, and they're investing in it. If we're not careful, the cultural sector will miss out because they will do it anyway. And they won't use us, they won't use culture, they will just create it using their architects or they'll manufacture it. So the creative sector, the cultural sector, if it doesn't understand the massive changes that are going on worldwide and really start to kind of confront some of these opportunities, they're going to miss out. And there's huge amounts of money being spent now on this sort of approach. And then lastly, coming to the end, the idea of thought leadership we think is huge. You've got to capture all this energy in a way that is accessible. So we are a great believer with all the clients that we work with that there's a thought leadership element, a TEDx style structure for every project that captures all the talking, the thinking, the legislation, the ideas that get lost and dropped down the side of the sofa. We want thought leadership to be the kind of rigor behind a lot of this thinking. And lastly, the cultural signature. When all of this is said and done, when everything is finished, when this city, let's say, has tried every opportunity it can to make this place distinct and unique and wonderful and so on, what's the Nike swoosh? What's the strap? What's the one big idea that you can tell someone in a bar that's extraordinary about this place? So it has to kind of boil down to something. And I'll finish really just on a film. This is an interesting project that we're involved in worldwide called Future Pace. We've partnered up with the Pace Gallery across the world now, and we're actually getting artists now who want to work with city makers, engineers, scientists. They want to do big, extraordinary, urban, wonderful projects. And we've grouped together about 15 artists worldwide from different countries, and we're now winning job after job after job, putting these artists into extraordinary situations, lighting buildings, projecting on the sides of architecture, taking lighting budgets for the river like the Leo Villarreal thing. And there's some great artists here. This is Team Lab, who are a Japanese arts collective who make these extraordinary digital installations on a massive scale, and you can control them through apps, so you can control what's happening. Leo, as I say, I've mentioned, is a fantastic American artist who we've worked with. And these artists are starting to run parallel to the old system of, I get an architect, an engineer, a lighting engineer. They're taking some of those budgets, or they're working with the architects, or they're working with cities who say, we want to have the best lighting events in the country. How can we do it? We've got budgets that we use for something else. Can we adapt them? So, I've sort of rambled through, hopefully very quickly, on a whole range of things. I'm incredibly optimistic about the world we're in, and I think these kind of gatherings are extraordinary because so many different organizations coming together. So the advice, for what it's worth, and I hopefully come from somebody who's working across the world on different projects, is culture is big, IP is big, cities are big, and they can be small cities and be big, but if you don't have a strong cultural and creative energy inside that place, you miss out on the ones that do it, because they are going for exactly the same kind of audiences that you're going for. Thank you very much.